Figuring out why you failed and reverse engineering the reasons. That's what a pre-mortem is. We do it before we go into a project. In the military, we call it wargaming. I'm going to show you how to do it here. Enjoy. So who remembers Blockbuster? If you're anything like me, I'm 45 years old. I can remember Blockbuster Video. They had thousands of stores at their peak. Every Friday night you'd go there, go and get a video cassette. You'd always end up forgetting to return them on time and they'd charge you late fees. Well, Blockbuster and what happened to them is a pretty amazing story, and they eventually failed. I'm going to talk to you about it now. So at their peak in 1997, they had about 6,000 stores and $9 billion in revenue. So they were an absolute powerhouse. Reed Hastings, a young guy at that point, he rented out a film called Apollo 13. He forgot to return it. They charged him a $40 late fee. And Reed was an ambitious guy. So he said, you know what, we're going to make a company that doesn't charge late fees but rents out videos. So he started a company called Netflix. They started off as a DVD rental company. They didn't charge late fees. And a few years into that project, they had 300,000 paying customers at about $20 a month. It was going pretty well. So they organized a meeting with the CEO of Blockbuster, and their pitch was like, you buy us for $50 million US, you run the physical side of the business, we'll run the online business. The Blockbuster CEO laughed them out of the room. Now at this point, Blockbuster would make about $800 million US a year in late fees. $800 million US a year in late fees.
It's not about money, it's about sending a message.
Reed Hastings understood something these Blockbuster executives did not understand, and that is that people were not happy with the business model as it stood, and they would jump quickly if they had the opportunity. So the offer was, you buy us for $50 million, and we'll run the online business, you run the physical Blockbuster, and it'll be a marriage made in heaven. Blockbuster CEO laughed him out of the room. 3 years later, Netflix has 1 million subscribers. Blockbuster tries to grab market share. They try and start their own online business. They totally lose money. They can't sustain the losses. Blockbuster filed for bankruptcy in 2010. The same year, Netflix had $161 million net annual income, and today Netflix is valued at more than $250 billion. And you can't find a Blockbuster store anyway. What happened? Well, what we just did right now is a post-mortem. If Blockbuster had been smart and conducted a pre-mortem, so before death, literally in Latin, they would have figured out that there were certain parts of their business model that just weren't suitable for the market we're in. They could have avoided that total loss. It might have made them acquire Netflix a lot earlier. They would have prevented their own demise. So this is my point to you. If you're a leader, this is a great thing to have in your toolkit. Just the ability to sit down, look at a project, and plan how it dies before you even start. It builds resilience into your plans. It adds innovation, makes people feel a lot more candid and contribute more to the space. And I know for me, pre-mortems and wargaming have saved my life. I've gone into certain situations overseas in Afghanistan or Iraq or wherever it was, looked at a mission, and we sat down and said, right, what goes wrong in this mission? What happens in phase 1 that makes us fail our mission? Phase 2, phase 3, and then we modify our plan accordingly. So pre-mortems are super valuable. They can save you a lot of pain just for a short little bit of focus. And it's such a great thing to build into your routine as a leader. All you need to do I'd say at the absolute minimum, 30 minutes of time. And you need a couple of people, a note taker, a whiteboard, whatever it is. Go into a room, plan out your risks and how things fail, and go from there. I'll show you a quick process now. So the military has a long history of wargaming and planning. I'll give you an example. The RAND Corporation, they're a think tank out of the United States. They've done something like 34 tabletop exercises conducting a war between the US and China. What they found was that the bases in Guam and Japan were highly exposed. So they spent billions of dollars in that case building a strike platform out of Darwin in Australia to try and negate some of the advantages that the US versus China, the Chinese military, might have in striking these bases. So conducting these war games and trying to anticipate what is going to happen in a future war has been key for a really long time. In the 1990 Gulf War, they figured out in Saudi Arabia they had a massing of about 400,000 US troops. They looked at that and said, look, the biggest risk to this is a weapon of mass destruction strike on these troops. Therefore, we need to make sure we're properly equipped, dispersed, we've got the right equipment, the right processes to deal with it, and they managed to negate that threat overall. So they do have a place. They have prevented a lot of incidences from happening in the past. And when some companies or organizations or militaries fail to do them, often what you see is a pretty big disaster.
Cut you up into little pieces and feed you to your pooches.
I'm going to talk you through a process for doing a pre-mortem right now. So with a pre-mortem, all we're doing is we're pretending it's the future and we're looking back on a failed project and we're considering why it failed and we're going to make adjustments in the present to try and counter that. A post-mortem is after the project's over, you discuss what hasn't gone well, doesn't really work. What they've found is in research that pre-mortems can increase the identification of future outcomes by about 30%. So just conducting a pre-mortem, you're basically increasing the resilience of your plans by 30%. So it's an objective well worth doing. What are the reasons you do a pre-mortem? One is you get to tackle your problems early and you get to do it in safety. So instead of me going out to the field in the military and trying to figure it out, we actually do it in a tabletop, calm room behind enemy lines or in a safe area and figure out what the plans are. It reduces bias, so it actually tests your plans and takes things out that could be blockers that you've already implemented. Increases collaboration before you even start your project, gets people more candid, and it builds resilience in all your people and all your plans. So how do I do it? For me, there's 4 steps. First thing you do is you brainstorm all your scenarios that cause you to fail. Second one is you share all those risks attached to it, so you actually write out all the risks that could happen. Step 3, you map out all your potential solutions to the greatest issues you face. So when you're mapping out all your risks in step 2, you try and prioritize the ones you think are high risk, high consequence. And in step 3, you're trying to come up with solutions to actually defeat those. And step 4 is your output plan. So your actual deliverable output that you generate, which should be an action plan. It should tell you these are the points we're going to take now to try and mitigate the failures we've anticipated in the pre-mortem. Bonus tip, don't focus on the process, focus on the outcome. What you're trying to do is come up with a plan that has already anticipated failure and increases the resilience of what you've got now. That in turn increases the chance you're going to succeed in your mission, in your project, doesn't matter what it is. I mean, these are actually pretty good fun. I actually enjoy doing these. We used to sit down and do them for ages. We'd come up with all sorts of creative ideas about why things fail. It's still good. I still do it now. When I was running Kill Capture, an online e-commerce business, the biggest risk to me out of all that was running out of cash. And the way to avoid running out of cash, I figured out, was to keep our fixed cost base at an all-time low. Now, that would mean you surrender what you call beta, so your ability to basically scale drops a bit. But I knew I could keep that business ticking over for a really long time by keeping that cost base low. And we've built that into our culture. We don't have physical stores. We don't have high cost base. It's all per unit costs. And because of that, I've been able to run it on oily rag for 10 years. We're actually turned 10 this year. Well done, Kill Capture. That was all based off of pre-mortem and some of the stuff I learned at business school. But I really enjoyed actually just sitting down and trying to figure that process out. I'm going to talk through a quick scenario, this is going to be relevant to a lot of people if you've got a small business. This is the pre-mortem we're going to conduct. Fast forward 12 months. Your practice is no longer profitable. You're basically running out of money. How did this happen? So what we're going to do is go through some of the steps now to try and figure it out. Was this a revenue problem? Was it a cost problem? Were there external factors? Were there organizational issues? We're going to dive into each one of these and try and figure out what it was. So in step 1, you're going to brainstorm scenarios for failure. With step 2, I'm going to talk about how these risks can be prioritized. So you're going to build a chart with 2 axes. One is high probability risk with a high impact. Right? So we're going to look at that quadrant on the top right. We're going to map all the ones in there that are going to be high probability, high impact. There's various other number of risks in my speaking business. For example, the cost per speaking engagement drops. There's all these other factors, but I'm counting the 2 really high risk ones as macroeconomic contraction and personal injury. So they're high probability, high impact, and we're going to address those 2 things. So in this phase, just sit there and write down all the things that can go wrong in your practice. I do a speaking practice. So for me, I think there's external factors. So a complete recession, a dry up of the market. There might be internal factors. For example, I may get sick. I may not be able to do keynote speaking. So for me, there's 2 parts to this. In the first one, with the external factors, I'm just going to make sure I've got other forms of income. I'm going to try and write books or work somewhere else or do training. I'm not going to rely solely on that income. I'm going to diversify that risk. For the second part, with me getting sick or injured and being unable to work, I'm just going to add insurance to my list. I'm going to make sure I've got employment insurance. And if I can't work for 12 months for some reason, I'm covered for that period. Right, so straight away, that goes on my to-do list. Make sure you got alternative forms of income this year. Let's start with writing a book. And step 2, I'm going to make sure I check my insurance and make sure that's current, paid for, and covers all forms of sickness and illness. So with step 3, we're going to brainstorm preventative solutions. So for the first one, macroeconomic contraction, I can't control that. If that happens, one of the first things that goes for company budgets is speakers like me that come in and talk a whole lot of smack. They're going to take them out, and we're just going to have in-house speakers. You won't be working. So for me, the first thing I think is, right, well, I'll need to develop some alternative forms of income. I can do some writing. I can do some coaching and workshops. I can do some more training. I can build, I can work more on Kill Capture, the clothing business. So for me, I'm going to make sure I build a number of different revenue streams. I'm just going to focus on one. I'm going to write a non-fiction book this year in my spare time. I'm going to build that up as much as I can. And I'm going to continue to build a YouTube channel and just offer as much free value and content as I can. So they're 2 factors. For the second one, which is personal injury, I'm going to make sure I've got my insurance all sorted out. I'm going to make sure I stay fit and healthy. I'm going to book my GP as much as I can this year to stay on top of things. Right, so already, just with that short exercise, I'm starting to mitigate a couple of major risks that you could come up against. And all I'm going to do is list them. I'm actually going to put down a plan. If you're in an organization or a team, you want to list the task, who's responsible for it, and when it's due by. And you want to have that on a list, and you want to keep people accountable to it. You want to update this as often as you need to, and just make sure everyone agrees to that list. Email it out to everyone, have it in Monday or Slack or whatever you want, and keep yourself accountable. It's just me, so it's going to be me and my operations manager. I'm going to tell her now, like, I'm going to start working on this non-fiction book. I'm going to book my insurance. I'm going to make sure I've got all my GP work is up to date, and I'm going to keep working on my YouTube channel. So that is my list. I'm going to start on that now, and I'm going to get even more granular. So I'm going to map over the next month. I'm going to produce 4 videos for YouTube. I'm going to produce an outline for my book. I'm going to renegotiate my insurance clause, and I'm going to attend the GP, right? So I'm going to have all that done by the end of February, for example, and I'm responsible for it. So you can see straight away, just by going through that creative exercise, I'm anticipating the risk. I'm thinking about the consequences of that risk. I'm coming up with solutions, and then I'm building an actual output to deal with it all. And it's just a to-do list. So going back to that bonus tip, don't focus on the process. Do this however you want. Just make sure you've got that culture of we consider the problems that could come up. We focus on prioritizing the risks, and then we deal with the ones that are really high risk immediately and first. And we've got a responsible person for it. That's a process. So you can just go through this stuff again and again and again. It doesn't take long at all. I basically just thought that stuff up on the fly. I actually do need to check my insurance. I don't even know if I updated it recently, and I've wanted to do a non-fiction book anyway. So there you go. Got some benefit out of this myself. I hope you enjoyed it too. That's the basics on how to do a pre-mortem. Hope you enjoy it. Stick around for more content later.